Hi, and welcome to the latest podcast episode. I'm Charlotte, I'm your host for today. I'm here today with Ben and Peter. Would you guys like to do a quick introduction for the audience?
Yeah, certainly. So my name is Peter Jones. I'm a cyber security specialist. Been in the industry for many years, but primarily focused on public sector.
Excellent.
Hi everyone, I'm Ben Simpson. I'm a Microsoft security specialist. Worked in the Microsoft space for about the past 5 years, and in the past 2 years I've had a real focus on the security side of things.
Excellent. Well, welcome both of you. And today, obviously, we're going to be talking about zero trust. So I think one of the most modern approaches to cybersecurity at the moment. But before we get started, why don't we just explain? Maybe you could explain simply, in simple terms, for those of us who aren't as involved in it as you are, what it is, and also how it's different to more traditional approaches.
Okay, to do this simply, okay, that's a challenge because zero trust is a big old subject.
It's a big old subject.
So it's an interesting subject because when you look at traditional networking and perimeter security for organisations, that was good to a point. But that point was probably 2 or 3 years before the pandemic, when sort of everything changed. And traditionally with perimeter security, everything that's outside of the network is not trusted. Everything that's inside of the network is trusted. And that was fine if you had all of your security controls in the network and so on. Now, of course, more and more people are working from home. Hybrid work is the absolute norm. So they're outside of that perimeter. And, of course, applications have moved from inside the data center off into the cloud. So, again, they're outside the perimeter as well. That whole perimeter now has almost disappeared. And that becomes a real challenge because, obviously trying to pull or backhaul all of this traffic into a central node where you can then apply security controls, it's just not very effective right now. So traditional security was good in its time, but it's almost had its day. And we really now need to be thinking about how we can do this thing better. And that's where zero trust comes in. Because zero trust takes a completely different approach. It assumes that the network is breached.
Okay.
And if that's the case, then it almost changes everything because all of a sudden you can't trust your internal network, your internal LAN. So almost you can trust it as much as you can trust a Starbucks cafe or your home network. So all of the focus now moves towards thinking about the endpoint, authenticating the user thoroughly, ensuring that the endpoint meets full compliance, and that you're using strong encryption in order to connect that endpoint through to the application. And if you can do that, then you can pretty much work from anywhere and connect to applications that reside anywhere. So it's a far more flexible, agile way of working, and it gives a better user experience as well.
Absolutely, I think Peter's hit the nail on the head with that one. A lot of the shift to zero trust is a cultural one as well, is ensuring that everyone is taking on board the controls and understanding the reasoning behind it. So it's really a shift in culture as well as a shift in technical control as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you talked about user experience. How does that relate to VPNs? Because I'm sure we've all experienced the pain of a VPN. I know I have.
Well, yeah, that's true. And again, this was the knee-jerk reaction at the point of the pandemic. Everyone started working from home, and we fired up those VPNs, and everyone sort of expanded their concentrators and enabled everything. And that was great at the time. It certainly solved a problem. But now we recognise hybrid work is absolutely normal, and therefore VPN has its limitations. Again, it's just providing that encrypted connection between the endpoint and the concentrator. After that, you're on the network, and again, everything is fair game in terms of lateral movement. So VPNs are fine, but they're not as good as they should be, especially when you're looking to make connections out to the outside world.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the other thing to think about as well is the application side. Not all of the applications need to be on the network. There's in today's age, we see a lot of software providers move into a SaaS-based solution where we can put sort of strong controls in front of those applications. And much of what we'll talk about later on in the video is what we can do to secure those SaaS-based solutions, although they're managed and the background of that and the infrastructure of that is managed by potentially a third party. There's also things that you can do to limit your attack surface and really reduce the risk of using those applications.
Interesting. So what are the key pillars of Zero Trust? What are the key things that it encompasses?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Peter touched on this before, but there's sort of three main key pillars from a Microsoft point of view. So the first one is assume breach. Every single application or user that is accessing your network or your environment should be untrusted until you can verify that they are who they say they are and that the device is safe and there's no vulnerabilities on that device. We'll get into this a little bit later of how we can check that and how we can ensure that those controls are enforced. The second is to always verify, so ensure that you've got those strong authentication methods in place. Authenticator apps are a good example of this, to ensure that there's another layer of that login. It's not just saying, okay, I've got my credentials, but are you actually who you say you are? Are those credentials leaked? And can you back that up with a third-party authenticator or a service-based authenticator? And then the last main pillar is using the methodology of least privilege as well. So ensuring that these users that are accessing these applications, if you get past the first two pillars, make sure that in a worst case scenario, someone's breached that account, someone's breached that authenticator, they don't have a lot of privilege to get to all of the data or all of the critical infrastructure. It's purely just what they need to use. And that's arguably one of the most important ones, is to ensure that each different department has the required permissions and not giving too much away.
Yeah, that's it. So I think those three elements were never trust, always verify.
Yeah.
Use rules of least privilege and assume breach across the estate. I could probably add a little bit to that, and that's from a data point of view. Also think about using strong encryption within your data estate, and using that data classification and data loss prevention. It's again really quite important.
Yeah.
And then also thinking about maybe automation and orchestration, because as we move more into that sort of zero trust world, it's about having a single unified shared security policy that goes across the entire estate. So if you're able to do that and automatically apply that security policy to the enforcement points throughout your network, then generally you're in pretty good shape.
Excellent. That's interesting. So obviously here we're focusing mainly on the public sector. What's the biggest way this can really help the public sector? Because obviously they have a lot of privacy and protection obligations anyway, as well as business as usual.
Yeah.
They've got a lot of compliance regulations. How is it helping them?
Well, I think people refer to zero trust as a journey, which is really frustrating because no one knows what that means.
It's a journey.
It's a journey. It's like,
everything's a journey.
Okay, what does that mean then? But it's a good way of looking at it actually, because a zero trust project really does encourage good practice for an organisation. So when you start that project, it really is, first of all, just thinking about the assets that you have in place today. Where are your critical assets? What data feeds are actually feeding those sort of applications? Who are your critical users? And what workflows are in place in order to connect those users to those applications.
And limit them, I suppose, to your point.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right. So if, just as the first step within a zero trust journey, you think about that, you understand where your critical data is, who's the owner of that critical data, and who basically has access to it. That's a fantastic first start. And then you can start to think about the policies that you apply, those granular policies to ensure that every single connection between both the client and the server, and also between servers, is verified explicitly.
Yeah, 100%. And on the other side of that as well is having these policies in place and having all of these controls in place also provides a best case scenario of the worst case scenario almost. So if someone was to breach the network and get into the network, we're really sort of limiting on what they can see. Going back to the value of least privilege, it really reduces the sort of blast radius of an attack if they can't access or they can't laterally move across the network, because we've implemented some sort of segmentation across these applications and the network. So I think it'll really help, especially with healthcare customers using or having access to privileged information. That's really where Zero Trust can help in limiting that exposure and obviously limiting any sort of fines that they might be liable to as well.
And that's interesting, isn't it? Because to your point, Peter, about assuming that inside the network is as awful as it is outside the network,
Yeah.
third-party suppliers pose a massive risk to the public sector, or to any organisation, not just the public sector. And endpoint devices, to your point about hybrid working. So I think it's probably obvious given what you've just talked about, but it would be good to sort of think about how public sector organisations can use Zero Trust with third-party suppliers to sort of mitigate the risks in that area.
Yeah, exactly. So these third parties, a lot of them offer sort of security controls such as single sign-on. So you can instantly bring that third party application under your controls. They also have multi-factor authentication or some way of enforcing that. And another thing is you can implement things like passwordless solutions as well. So, Face ID scanning, for example, accessing it with a PIN. So, and what that really does is a lot of people have a stigma around passwordless, saying that it could be less secure almost. When you put in, say, Windows Hello, for example, you set up a PIN. And a lot of people see that as an attack vector, an easy way to gain access to the device. But for me, it really shifts passwords into being an anomaly. So when someone's accessing an application and it may be through a link that someone sent, so say, for example, a phishing link, when someone goes to access that and it asks for your password, when for the past 3 months it's been scanning your face and automatically allowing you into that application, it raises that secondary flag to say, hold on, I'm not used to this.
Yeah.
Should I report that? Is this normal? So there's a lot of different ways that you can pull third-party applications into your control and actually have much more control over it, rather than just relying on their security and the other controls that you've put in place. It's really focusing on the Zero Trust.
No, it's good. And to your point, Peter, earlier about user experience, and I know we were talking about VPN there, but I think that's a good point too about user experience. I signed into PayPal earlier this week and it asked for my fingerprint because I was on my laptop, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's so much easier than having to remember all these blessed passwords.
Passwordless is fantastic, because it really it's just a gift that keeps on giving.
It is.
It improves the user experience, and effectively it makes your organization more secure at the same time. So who doesn't want that? Possibly
the first time that those two things have married together in the history of IT.
Exactly, and I think that's a lot of the stigma around Zero Trust is it's complicated, it's convoluted, but it's really not the case with some of the technologies that we've got around at the moment that can really help streamline processes, streamline your work day, really.
Interesting. And So in an earlier episode, we were talking about managed detection response, and zero trust to me seems a perfect bedfellow for that solution, because it really is two things working towards the same objective. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Zero trust is a lot about visibility. It's about understanding what's in your estate and who has access to those resources, and ensuring that that's absolutely locked down with as granular a security policy as you can achieve. But if you have that visibility and you understand exactly who's connecting to the network, how they're connecting, when, why, and so on, then you really are empowered to be able to do an awful lot. And it sets you up beautifully for being able to respond in the event of a breach.
Yeah.
If you can see your valuable assets, if you can see the users that are connecting to them, and if you've got that visibility that shows the heuristics, the behavioral analytics, so you can see exactly how that endpoint is maybe doing something that would indicate a compromise of some sort, then you can pick up on that very, very quickly and be able to respond to it effectively, which is really quite difficult. Because in order to have that level of visibility and eyes on these tools, ideally what you're looking to have is a SOC, a Security Operations Center.
Yeah.
And that's typically out of reach for most organizations right now.
Yeah.
So if you don't have the people in place to be able to do a 24/7 coverage with all of the right skills in threat intelligence and all of the other things that you need, exactly, yeah, then that's the time really to think about third parties and to consider bringing in a trusted third party that can provide that coverage for you. And not just a third party that sort of looks at your estate, sees an indication of compromise, sends you an email to say something's dodgy is going on and go fix. It's building a trusted relationship with a partner where they work with you pre-breach, understand you, understand your teams, understand where your valuable assets reside, and in the event of a breach, they're forewarned about what is required in order to close down that breach as effectively as possible. So you really need to, if you can, empower them to take action on your behalf, maybe at 3 o'clock in the morning, just to reduce the impact of that blast. And then, of course, you can address, how to manage it effectively at 8 o'clock when everyone comes in and is available to deal with it.
Yeah, and that's to your point earlier, Ben, about limiting the blast radius. Because I know with MDR, the sooner you spot an attack, the better, obviously, because sometimes it can take them days and weeks, months to get to the data. So I'm guessing zero trust combined with that managed detection response is belt and braces to stopping them from getting to the data.
Absolutely, and I think for the most part with zero trust, it provides a good foundation of. So you're implementing all of these solutions, such as an MDM solution. You're keeping a close eye on your identity provider, and all of these solutions provide you with signals, and all of those signals have to go somewhere. So sending those to an MDR environment is the best way to manage that. So someone's constantly looking at all of these signals, because you can enforce as much as you want, but if you're not doing anything with that information, if there's no one sort of looking at the alerts that are popping up, spotting trends, threat analysis, then it is good in itself to just have these foundations in place. But the next level up for that is implementing an MDR and having someone action those alerts and ensure that any patterns that are arising are getting dealt with. Is there any sort of malicious activity on the network going on? That's ultimately
that's the dream.
That is the dream.
So big topic, lots of things to do. What's a practical action plan that people watching this podcast could take away with them?
I would say if you're thinking about implementing zero trust, the first question you need to ask yourself is why? What's the reason for doing it? When you go down this path, it's I'm going to use it, journey. I've got to say it.
Right, it's on record now. You used it.
Everyone does. Everyone
I
does.
couldn't avoid it. I tried. But yeah, it is. And therefore, you need to be absolutely sure of the reasons for doing it and have buy-in from, senior leadership team and ownership of senior leadership team for the project. So, is it to become more agile as you see your applications moving into the cloud? Is it for maybe user experience, as we've talked about? There's a number of reasons why it might benefit your business, but you need to be absolutely clear as to what those reasons are first. Have the buy-in from the senior leadership team and ensure that they're prepared to promote that into the business. Once you've got that buy-in, then it's a case of building the team. And Zero Trust is not just about technology. It really is about the whole business. And therefore, you need to include the whole business. It's obviously your infrastructure managers and your security operations team. But then also think about those line of business managers, the people who actually do own the data and own the responsibility of access to that data. They need to be involved and make sure that they know exactly where their valuable assets are. Think about the users and how they're going to be impacted. This will be a change for them. They're used to VPN. And now, potentially, this is going to be a little bit easier.
Yeah.
But you've got to bring them along on that journey. And
not once, but twice.
I'll find another word for it. I'll assure you of that. But you've got to bring them along and ensure that they are, very much aware of why you're making the changes.
Yeah.
And then it's also the HR team and the legal team. Again, they need to be involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Peter touched on it a little bit with the users. It's important to have a solid user acceptance testing plan to ensure that all of these changes that you're putting in are well received. There's no change in functionality. There's no change in day-to-day sort of productivity as well. And the other side of the coin is you need to have a good scoping plan, understand what your landscape looks like, understand all of your critical data, your critical infrastructure. And I think the one takeaway from this should be to, even if you're not ready to do this on a massive scale, is just start small. Highlight your most critical application that is maybe a bit too unsecure for your liking, and implement a zero trust architecture around that application. See how it's taken from your users, and then move on to your next one. And then eventually you'll be in a situation where it's not a drastic change, it's more of a guided approach. And we've been through this 10 other times with other applications. Now we're incorporating the whole network. We're taking everything under a zero trust control. So it's not so much of a shock to the system for users. I think that's really important to keep in mind.
Yeah, so and that sort of brings us on to our final point, in terms of what do employees and suppliers think about zero trust? Because as we touched on earlier, I guess if it is a nicer experience, you haven't got to remember 600 passwords and you haven't got to go through the pain of a VPN dial-up, how old do I sound? You can tell where I started. But so that must help with adoption if people enjoy the experience more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, going back to sort of the passwordless solution as well, that is a really well adopted sort of system. But also you can users aren't stupid, right? So we can back up these changes and justify it with solid statistics. So LastPass and Cisco Talos did a research study that 80% of all breaches come from some sort of leaked credentials.
Yeah.
So that is straight away, if you say that to your users and say, look, this is a real problem, we need to tackle it, this is how we're going to do it, and just make sure everyone's in the loop. And you're always going to get some of the users that maybe don't want to have an authenticator on their phone or their personal mobile, which is completely fine. But there's an answer to all of these challenges. There's FIDO2 keys, for example, for those particular users that don't want authenticators on their phones. And I think the main message for a zero trust model is it's not one size fits all. There's a solution to fit everyone's need. You just have to do the research behind it and see what is the best solution for this specific use case.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add to that is the actual. It's good for the security team as well and the infrastructure team. Sometimes it can be a real challenge because they're very much used to IP addresses and geographic location for access to various services and so on, and moving into a zero trust architecture can be a real challenge. But once you do so, then you have that unified security policy across the entire estate. It becomes intuitive as changes happen and as other people sort of join the organisation to apply them to that zero trust architecture and give them those policies that are well defined and well understood across the organisation. And so everything becomes a lot more structured. So it can be quite painful to move into that zero trust architecture. But once you're there, it really does ease up the process a little bit.
It sounds like it affects lots of other things in a positive way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also to take on board is if you're striving for any sort of governance framework controls, if you want to be NIST compliant, CIS compliant, the CAF compliant, for example, if you want to achieve these goals, you can integrate that with your zero trust architecture plan and ensure that when you're implementing these solutions that they conform to those frameworks. So it can be a killing two birds with one stone situation where you can really get a lot of value out of this exercise, although it might take a while. You're getting a lot out of it as well. So investing for the future as well as solving a current issue. Absolutely.
Great. Well, thanks, guys. That was really helpful. I did find that interesting. I do find it interesting. Probably like you, I could chat about this for quite some time. But thank you both, and I'll see you again soon.
Lovely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.